I wanted to just, first of all, give you a sense of what's happening in these two countries, in Israel, Palestine, and South Africa, and also with some visuals. And what I want to emphasize is not so much the status, in other words, what is the condition of apartheid, but rather how it comes about, the process of apartheid, because that is actually, when you see it in happening, you can realize that it is a very draconian process, and is places a tremendous stress on the population that is being the populations that are being not just separated, but actually transferred, as you will see. And so these signs, the signs that I put on the poster, are real signs. I mean, they're the ones in South Africa, of course, are not currently posted, but they're in museums, and they are an indication of the condition of apartheid when it was being enforced. And the interesting thing is that apartheid in South Africa, contrary to people's a common impression, is not that old. It's not something that has been there ever since the beginning of white settlements. It's something that's actually quite recent, and although there was discrimination, there was a hierarchy ever since the white settlers came, but in terms of an actual systematic legal separation of populations, that is something that has really come about only after the Second World War, in both South Africa and of course in Palestine. And so anyway, these just give you some indication of the areas that were in which only whites were allowed in some areas and only blacks were allowed in some other areas, and so forth. In Israel Palestine, namely in the Palestinian territories, there is, well, actually what is posted is only one side, but there actually is a separation on both sides, and an exclusion on both sides. But the only one that the Israelis post is the exclusion of Israeli citizens from Area A. So if you go to the West Bank, the West Bank is classified according to the Oslo Agreement of 1993. The West Bank is divided up into three main areas. There's a Zone A, Zone B, and Zone C. So Zone A are those areas that are under Palestinian Authority control, ostensibly. I say ostensibly because even though the Palestinian Authority rules in those, or governs in those areas, the Israeli army, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, can enter those areas at any time. There's nothing to prevent them from doing so. All right? Then there's Zone B, which are areas that are outside of the main Palestinian cities, but are somewhat built-up areas, suburbs, and these zones, which are larger than the Area A, are areas that are, according to Oslo, are under joint authority of the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli military administration for the occupied territories. Of course, in practice, the Israeli authorities always dominate because they have the power, they have the military force, and they can override anything that the Palestinian Authority says. And then you have Zone C, which is the rest of the West Bank, which is actually most of it, is Zone C, and these are areas that are exclusively under the control of the Israeli military authorities. And so what happens is that the exclusion of Palestinians whose residency is in the West Bank, their exclusion from, say, the settlements, or their exclusion from Israel proper, is never posted. But that is a rule which is absolute, and any Palestinian who lives in the West Bank, or for that matter lives in Gaza, if they want to travel to even a hospital inside Israel proper, they cannot do so without applying first for a permit to travel. It takes 1, maybe 2 weeks, maybe longer to get that permit, and only then, and if it is approved, then they can travel. If not, then they're out of luck. So what I was showing here are the signs that are posted that prohibit, theoretically, prohibit Israeli citizens from entering Zone A. Okay? Now, in practice, it's another matter, because I have gone into Zone A areas alongside with Israeli citizens. And most of these are, of course, peace activists, Israeli peace activists, but they had no trouble coming with me into Area A. So the rules are much more relaxed when it is applied to Israelis. And another sign. This one is at one of the entry checkpoints to Bethlehem. Now, you're very familiar. I think most of you are aware of the wall, the separation wall. Israel calls this a fence, but it is correct that it is a separation. It is a separation barrier, and it is not always a barrier between Israelis and Palestinians. This is actually a separation wall between Palestinians and Palestinians. So the buildings that you see on the other side of that wall are in the Palestinian city of Al-Azariya, and the house on this side of the wall is in the Palestinian city of Ras Al Amud. Okay? Now the reason why the wall has been built here is because this side, the side that we're on, is being cleared. You see, this was a city at one time. There were many houses here. It was a city, and gradually over time, and particularly, this has been particularly accelerated after the Oslo Agreement in 1993, is that this land has been gradually cleared as a result of systematic demolitions by the Israeli authorities of Palestinian houses. And the reason why they're demolishing these houses is because Ras Al Amud is part of something that was planned long ago, and that was that it would become part of Greater Jerusalem. Okay? And as you may recall, in 1967, Israel, in that war, won control of the West Bank and Gaza, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. And what it did is that even though it has given the Palestinian Authority it has sort of recognized the Palestinian territories as being Palestinian territories, but it has kept for itself the area around Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem, that was one time part of the West Bank, was on the other side of the Green Line. And so by including it in the Jerusalem municipality, eventually the idea is that this entire area will be filled with homes for Israeli Jews, and it will be totally cleansed of Palestinians. Okay, now let's take a look at the map of South Africa. This is during apartheid, when we had the Bantustans, or the native homelands. And the native homelands are designated here in gray, and there are actually two types of homelands. There are you can see the Ciskei, Transkei, Bophuthatswana, Venda are some of the homelands, and then of course the KwaZulu. And you see, some of them are obviously non-viable entities. So even though the white South African government of the time created these with the idea that they would be self-governing, you can see that many of them are completely non-viable just because they're all broken up into small little pieces. The reason that the South African government wanted to create some kind of self-government is because they didn't want responsibility for large portions of the black population in South Africa. And so they basically said, okay, we're going to withdraw our administration from these areas, and we're not going to provide you with medical services, we're not going to provide education, we're not going to do any of that stuff, you're on your own, and then you can govern yourself. And of course, in a sense, that self-government is a bit of a farce, because none of these areas have any control over their borders. They don't control foreign policy, and so they are, dependent on South Africa in some major way. And some of them are actually officially dependent homelands. So that means that the South African government still had some role in the administration of those areas. So you can see that what happened under apartheid, and this is all after the Second World War, is that in order to create a new system of governance, of controlling the majority black population, the South African government was carving up the territory and drawing all of these borders. And this is very similar to what we see happening in the occupied territories of Palestine. It's just another map showing those areas. Okay, so what has happened in South Africa during apartheid is you had basically 6 regions. So it was the land became compartmentalized into the white-dominated South Africa, which is most of the area. There was one area which is sort of enclosed around that South Africa encloses this area, which was ostensibly an independent country, initially known as Basutoland, that later became known as Lesotho, and then you had the black homelands. You had the independent ones and then the dependent ones, and then we had when in 1950, beginning in 1950, the South African Parliament passed the Group Areas Act. It was the first version, the first round of the Group Areas Act, and what that did is it basically said that it was by law the people of a certain skin color must reside in certain areas that are reserved for people of that skin color. Remember that before 1950, even though there was a hierarchy, even though the whites controlled things, but people lived in mixed neighborhoods. I mean, even in the city center, there were blacks and whites and coloreds and Asians could be neighbors, and so that basically came to an end after 1950 with the first Group Areas Act. So the homelands. This is an example of one of the homelands today, the Transkei, and you can see that the pattern of development in the Transkei is dramatically different from other parts of the country that were not part of the homelands. And well, for one thing, if you go into the countryside, you can see that there are houses that are scattered all over the place, and each of these houses has a small agricultural plot. So this is the former homelands are the only places where there are small owner cultivated farms, and the rest of South Africa there are no owner cultivated farms, only the large commercial farms that are owned by whites. They took the land when they originally settled the country, and they, of course, because they're so large, they have to hire labor to work those farms, and so it's primarily black labor that actually works those farms. So this is a very different in the homeland such as the Transkei. The pattern of development was different. Okay, so let's compare that to Palestine. This is just simply a map that shows basically the blue area is the part that was allocated to the Jewish state by the United Nations Partition Plan of November 1947, and there was a 2-year war in which Zionist terrorist groups went around expelling Palestinians from villages and conquering land that was beyond what was allocated to the presumptive Jewish state, and so they conquered the areas that you see in red. Okay, and so when the ceasefire took place at the beginning of 1949, the ceasefire line included the red zones in the Jewish state, and the green areas are what are today recognized as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
When you said red, did that include the sort of orange?
The pink one is Jerusalem,
That's what I meant.
and so what is happening there is that what was allocated. It's because of differences between what was allocated under the UN partition plan versus the ceasefire line. In fact, even the UN partition plan included an island, which is the Mount Scopus, was an island, and in the Palestinian state, the presumptive Palestinian state. So that's why you have another color there for what was happening in and around Jerusalem. Okay, so what is happening today in the West Bank, as you see, is that just like the map of South Africa, is that the landscape of the West Bank has been partitioned up into many different zones. And in fact, it's actually more complicated than just area A, B, and C. You see the area A are the dark brown areas, B is the medium brown, and then area C is the rest of it. But there are some conditions on the rest of it. So with area C. So for example, the orange zones are known as the settlement blocks. And the Israeli Knesset very recently had a very serious discussion about the next step being the annexation of the orange areas, the settlement blocks. And of course, there's been a worldwide protest against that, except from the United States. So, in summary, I don't have time to go into all the details, but we have a hypersegmentation of the land in Israel-Palestine into these 12 zones, and you see it's not just zone A, B, and C in the occupied territories, but it's different types of zone C depending upon which side of the wall they're on, depending upon which side of whether they're in the Jerusalem municipality or not, and then a special area that is now called E1, which is not open for settlement, but soon will be, and it is an area for exclusive Israeli Jewish expansion. And then the two zones of Hebron being a special zone because of Jewish settlers. There's some very militant Jewish settlers who are insisting that they have a historical right to insert themselves into the very heart of Hebron, and so that's why there's that. And Gaza is a special case because Israel formally withdrew from Gaza in September 2005, but still controls everything that goes in and out, and we'll get into that a little bit.
Does apartment blocks, settlement blocks, does that just mean apartment blocks?
No. So it's actually land that is not largely it's not settled. I mean, it's land where there are very few people actually living on that land, but the settlement blocks are lands that are sort of loosely attached to Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And the idea is that in the future, the settlements could expand into the settlement blocks and use them for certain purposes. And the only reason they haven't is because they're like the major settlement blocks are right along the Jordan River, which is well below sea level, and it's very, very hot there. So nobody really wants to live in those settlement blocks. But there are lots of plans to use the mineral resources of the settlement blocks. I mean, some of them are already being used, for example, in the L'Oréal and a number of companies are actually using minerals that in the settlement blocks areas or around the Dead Sea to create commercial products in occupied territory. Now, what you see here is an example of how when you draw a lot of borders within a country which is densely populated, what you get is you can see these zones. You can literally see the different zones of development, and in this case, you see something which alternates between Palestinian. So I'm here in the Palestinian town of Jayus, and looking out to the south west, and so I see a border, and of course there's a border fence or border wall between each of these zones, and so the next one is Tsufin. Tsufin is an Israeli settlement. It's still in the West Bank, but it's a settlement. And then you see the Palestinian city of Qalqilia, and then you see the Israeli city of Kfar Saba, which is one of the major cities in central Israel. Anyway, so what one of the things that this does, of course, is that, which is sort of the obvious, is that by drawing these lines, you enable two different populations to coexist at very different standards of living. And well, this is in South Africa, so this is an example of how the whites live in South Africa today, and this is in Simonstown, which is just south of Cape Town, and then the whites can be seen playing golf, and this is in marked contrast to the townships. And by the way, I guess I should say, because I don't think we define the townships. So townships are the areas that were created largely under the Group Areas Act for the transfer of populations. So mainly for the transfer of non-white populations, and this is how most of the townships were created. So this one is Khayelitsha, which is one of two major townships in Cape Town, and then in Israel you have, for example, the settlement. This is Ma'ale Adumiim, and you can see the modern buildings, just like the white South African residences, versus a Palestinian village. And so the separation wall, I mean, another function that it has is to keep these two populations separate, because they are living at such vastly different standards of living. But there's another thing. Well, this is just simply an illustration in South Africa of how you have, and this you see that all the time, is you have a team of workers, and all the workers, the people who are doing the manual labor, are all black. And then the supervisor there, who's making some fun, is white, and this is something that you see all the time in South Africa, and similarly it is in Palestine. So, for example, Palestinians are the main labor force for the construction of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, as well as in Israel proper, and so you very frequently you'll see Israeli supervisors, and then all the workers are Palestinians. So just to illustrate what Vic and Barbie have already mentioned is about the POS system that was implemented in the early 1950s. And so what this simply means is that if a black wanted to work in a city which is the cities were of course creations of the white settlers, so to speak, and so the blacks, in order to continue working in the cities. I mean, this particular one is Durban, and they would have to apply for a permit and get this passbook. So this is the passbook that is what, 37 pages long or 40 pages long, and so it's, if you've got the photo page, the tax that's paid to maintain this book, and then permits to reside in Durban, a medical exam, all of these, requirements that blacks have to carry, but whites do not. And then this, of course, is the work authorization, and then the work record. So this is, in other words, you're not only authorized by being sponsored by an employer, a white employer, but then you have to keep track of it. So every month there is a stamp there or a signature from the employer verifying that this person was actually employed. And then in Israel, before the HP ID card, they used paper. It was a passbook just like the South African passbook, and this had to be shown to the Israeli authorities at the checkpoints. And this is the insides of a checkpoint, crowded, and then you have to go through these turnstiles.